My name is Luis. I had just turned 23 when I found myself in a situation that still haunts me every day. The kind of situation that, if I'm honest, I would have laughed off as ridiculous and unimportant, had it not been for the terrible things I witnessed and experienced. But now, looking back, I realize I wasn't laughing at all. I moved to a small town called Hollow Creek a few years ago, located at the edge of the forest. The town was quiet, peaceful, perhaps too peaceful. Most people I met there seemed kind, friendly even, but there was always something off about their eyes, like they were hiding something. But it wasn't until I moved into the house on the outskirts of town that things started to spiral out of control. The house was old, much older than anything I had seen before. The windows were grimy, the wood was splintered, and the front door creaked with each gust of wind. The land it stood on seemed to be slowly being consumed by the forest, vines curling up around the structure like the fingers of something trying to drag it back into the earth. It was cheap too. Almost too cheap for its size, and for that, I should have known better. But, naive as I was, I thought nothing of it. I had my reasons for leaving the city, an ex-girlfriend who couldn't understand the meaning of space, and a life that felt like it was falling apart at the seams. Hollow Creek was supposed to be my fresh start. The first few days were uneventful. The neighbors waved at me from across the street, and I began to get used to the constant chirping of crickets and rustling of leaves. It was peaceful in a way that made me feel comfortable, like I could finally breathe again. But it wasn't long before things started to feel wrong. It started with the sounds. At night, when the wind was just right, I would hear soft scraping noises coming from the attic. At first, I thought it was just an old house settling, but the noises persisted. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving around up there. I checked the attic several times, finding nothing but dust and a few old boxes. But every night, the noise returned, scraping and scratching like claws against wood. One night, I decided to stay up and investigate. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my phone, I climbed up into the attic. The air was thick, musty with the scent of forgotten things, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I searched the room from corner to corner, shining the light into every crack, every shadow. There was nothing. But just as I turned to leave, my flashlight flickered out. I shook it, tapping it against my palm, but it refused to come back on. That's when I heard it. A whisper. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was a child's voice, soft and sing-song, calling my name. Come play with me. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned toward the sound, my blood running cold. There, at the far end of the attic, a figure stood. A little girl. Her pale face was almost too white, her long hair hanging limp like wet threads, but her eyes. Those eyes were the most unsettling thing I had ever seen. They were completely black. No pupils, no whites, just an endless, empty void. And then, she smiled. Not a smile of innocence, but a smile of something much darker. Come play with me, she repeated, taking a step toward me. I stumbled backward, tripping over an old chair, and in the panic of that moment, I hit my head hard on the floor. Everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold wooden floor of the attic. My head throbbed, and the room spun in slow circles. For a few moments, I just lay there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The little girl with the black eyes. It didn't seem real. But I could still feel the lingering terror in my chest, that cold pit of dread that refused to leave. I slowly sat up, wiping the sweat from my brow. My flashlight was lying beside me, still off, the beam of light swallowed by the darkness. For a second, I considered going back down the stairs and just leaving the house. But something in the pit of my stomach told me I couldn't leave, not yet, not without understanding what was going on. I stood up shakily, making my way to the stairs. The attic door creaked as I opened it, the dim light from the hallway barely cutting through the darkness. But as I stepped into the hall, something felt off. The air was thicker than usual, heavier, almost suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every shadow in the corners of the house seemed darker than it had before. The house felt like it was alive, as though it were watching me, waiting for something. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my nerves, but the whispering began again. "Come play with me." The voice was no longer faint, no longer distant. It was close, too close. I spun around, expecting to see that little girl standing behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty hallway. I wasn't alone, though. I could feel it now, the weight of unseen eyes, the oppressive presence that hung in the air. It was like the house itself had a pulse, and I was its prey. I rushed down the stairs and back to the living room. I needed to get out of the house. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and rushed to the door, but as I pulled on the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked, and I hadn't locked it. I tried again, harder this time, but it wouldn't open. Panic surged within me. I had to get out. I turned to the windows, hoping I could break one open and escape that way, but they were sealed shut. It was as if the house was trapping me inside. Then, I heard the footsteps. Light at first, like someone was walking just above me, just out of view. But as they drew nearer, they grew louder, closer. Whoever, or whatever, was up there was coming down the stairs, slowly, methodically. I backed away from the door, my heart racing, as the footsteps reached the bottom of the staircase. I couldn't see anyone. No one was there. But the footsteps were so real, so distinct. They were coming closer. The air turned frigid, the temperature dropping drastically in a matter of seconds. I could see my breath in front of me, thick and white. The house was colder than it had ever been, and I could feel the chills crawling up my spine as if something was right behind me. I didn't want to look. But I had no choice. I had to look. I slowly turned, my eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw it. The little girl. She was standing in the corner, her black eyes staring directly at me, unblinking, her head tilted to one side, a strange smile spreading across her face. I froze. "Come play with me," she whispered again. And her voice wasn't the voice of a child anymore. It had become something deeper, darker. It sounded like a chorus of many voices, all twisted together, all calling my name. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped by her gaze. And then, the house did something I hadn't expected. It began to change. The walls around me warped and stretched. The floor beneath my feet cracked and splintered, revealing an endless abyss beneath me. The light from the lamps flickered and died, leaving me in total darkness. The only thing that remained was the sound of the girl's voice, echoing in my head, growing louder with every passing second. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The house was alive. Suddenly, I was yanked forward. A force, invisible but undeniably real, dragged me across the room toward the center of the floor, where the crack in the ground had widened, revealing a deep, gaping hole. The girl's voice, now a shriek, rang in my ears, and as I was pulled toward the edge, I saw something terrifying. The hole wasn't empty. It was filled with hundreds, thousands of black eyes, glowing eyes, like the girl's, all staring at me, all waiting for me to fall in. But I didn't fall. I woke up in my bed. The morning sun was streaming through the window, warm and comforting. It was all a nightmare. It had to be. But when I went downstairs to the kitchen, the door was wide open, standing ajar as if I had never locked it in the first place. And on the table, in the center of the room, was a small, hand-drawn note. It read, "Come play with me." The handwriting was childish, jagged, but unmistakably human. And then, in the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single black eye, staring at me from the shadows. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stared at the eye. It wasn't just the eerie sensation that I was being watched, it was the fact that, in that moment, I knew it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. The eye was real. It was as if it were staring into my very soul, judging me, waiting for me to react. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my body rebelling against every instinct I had to run, to escape. The black eye remained there, just out of reach, watching me from the dark corner of the room. I didn't want to blink. I didn't want to break eye contact because, deep down, I feared that if I did, I might never see it again. But more terrifying than that was the gnawing thought that if I blinked, the eye would be gone, and something far worse would take its place. The house was still. Too still. The silence was suffocating, almost like the air had thickened, pressing in on me. I slowly backed away, my feet moving as if on their own accord, pulling me toward the door, toward freedom. But as I stepped closer to the exit, the black eye followed me. I slammed the door behind me and stood outside, gasping for air. The fresh breeze felt like a reprieve, a brief moment of sanity in a world that had suddenly become anything but. I tried to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened, but there was no logic to it. I had been inside my own house, my own sanctuary, and yet, it felt like I was never truly alone. Something had been lurking, something had been waiting for me to cross the line. And then, I heard it again. That voice. The child's voice. "Come play with me." It was faint, barely a whisper, but it echoed through the trees, through the very air. It was calling me, pulling me back. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the girl standing behind me, but no one was there. The streets were empty, the houses lined up like silent witnesses to my terror. But it was there. I could feel it. The presence. Like something ancient, something that didn't belong, was moving just beyond the edge of my vision. My eyes darted from one shadow to another, but I couldn't see anything. It was always just out of sight. I had to leave. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that staying in that house would destroy me. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I didn't need to. I had learned enough. The house was alive. The little girl with the black eyes wasn't just a ghost, a figment of my fear. She was a part of the house, a part of something much darker. I walked briskly down the road, keeping my head low, trying to avoid looking at the houses that lined the street. The longer I stayed in Hollow Creek, the more I realized the town itself was suffocating. There was something wrong with this place. Something that had been hidden for years, buried beneath layers of charm and peace. I reached the town's small library, a modest building tucked away in the corner of Main Street. A place of quiet, a place where I could think. The door was slightly ajar, and for a moment, I debated whether or not I should go in. But something pulled me toward it, like an invisible hand guiding me. Inside, the library was dim, the shelves towering above me, filled with forgotten stories, whispers of another time. The musty scent of old books filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like a safe haven. Until I heard it again. "Come play with me." I whirled around. There, standing in the middle of the library, was the little girl. Her black eyes burned into me, the smile on her face twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. "Come play with me," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, searching for any explanation, any way to escape. But the more I tried to think, the more I realized how hopeless it all was. There was no way out. I was trapped. Trapped in this nightmare, where the line between the living and the dead was blurred beyond recognition. I backed away slowly, not daring to turn my back on her. But as I reached the door, it slammed shut on its own, the walls of the library beginning to twist, to bend. The shelves began to groan under the pressure, and the floor creaked as though it, too, was alive, moving beneath my feet. The girl stepped forward, her bare feet barely making a sound on the floor as she moved closer, her face now inches from mine. Her breath was cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the library. "Why don't you want to play with me?" she asked, her voice a soft, mournful tone that made my skin crawl. "Please. Let me go," I begged, my voice trembling. She smiled again, that terrible, gaping grin. "Too late. You're already playing." And then, the world around me shattered. The books exploded from their shelves, pages flying through the air like a storm. The walls cracked open, revealing the blackness beyond them, endless, infinite voids stretching out like the mouth of a monstrous creature waiting to devour me. The air grew thick with the sound of whispers, a chorus of voices crying out for attention, for something to feed on. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The girl's laughter rang in my ears, louder and louder, drowning out everything else. The shadows closed in around me, and the black eyes, the hundreds of them, appeared everywhere, staring, watching, waiting. I could feel them crawling into my skin, into my bones, spreading through me like a disease, consuming me from the inside out. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, everything stopped. I woke up on the floor of the library, gasping for air, covered in sweat. The walls were normal again. The books were where they belonged. There was no girl. No black eyes. But I wasn't alone. The library door was open, and standing in the doorway, watching me with those same empty, black eyes, was the girl. And she wasn't smiling anymore. She was waiting. I froze, my body stiffening as the girl stepped forward, her tiny feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Her eyes, black as night, locked onto mine with a weight that seemed to crush me. The air around me thickened, and I could feel the suffocating presence of whatever was in this place closing in on me, tightening its grip. "Why do you keep running?" she asked, her voice echoing through the room, the words dripping with venom. "You know you can't escape." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, each beat urging me to flee, to do anything but stay here. But the truth, the terrible truth, gnawed at me. I wasn't going anywhere. Not anymore. "Please. I don't want to play," I whispered, my voice barely audible, shaking from fear. The girl's face twisted into that cruel, wicked smile again, her eyes widening with what I could only describe as delight. She tilted her head to the side, studying me as if I were some kind of fragile creature, something to be broken apart and reassembled for her amusement. "You were already playing," she repeated, her voice now a chorus of many, distorted and echoing through the room. "And you'll never stop playing." Suddenly, the room felt too small, too suffocating. I was trapped in this space, the shadows pressing in around me like they were alive, closing off every escape. The walls seemed to move, warping and bending, and the floor beneath me trembled, as if the house itself was alive, alive in the worst possible way. The girl stepped closer, her footsteps soft but sure, echoing through the library. With each step she took, my chest tightened, and I felt as though I were suffocating. My mind screamed at me to run, to do anything, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, a prisoner in my own body. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw them. The eyes. They were everywhere. Thousands of them. They lined the shelves, covered the walls, peered out from beneath the books, and stared at me from the cracks in the ceiling. The black eyes, glowing with that same emptiness, watching me, waiting. I didn't understand what I was seeing. My mind could hardly process it. How could I? How could anyone understand something so unnatural? It wasn't real, it couldn't be. But every fiber of my being screamed that it was. That these eyes weren't just some hallucination or trick of the mind. They were real, and they were here for me. The girl's voice, now distorted and impossible to ignore, cut through the chaos. "You've played for so long, haven't you?" she asked. Her voice mocking. "You were so tired. So close to the end. You just don't know it yet." I felt a chill run through me, a coldness that had nothing to do with the air in the room. The words, those awful words, made something deep within me tremble with fear. I don't understand," I gasped, my voice cracking. The girl's smile grew wider, impossibly wide, stretching across her face, until it seemed to swallow her entire head. Her black eyes burned with hunger, and I realized, too late, that whatever was inside her wasn't just a ghost, a spirit, or a child. It was something far darker. Something ancient. "You never will," she whispered, her voice now a low growl. "Because the game has already been played." And then, she lunged at me. Everything happened in an instant. Her tiny hands gripped my arm, her cold fingers digging into my skin, and I screamed. I tried to pull away, but it felt as though the girl's grip was made of iron, as though the very walls of the library had come alive, holding me in place. The shadows around us surged forward, reaching toward me like tendrils, curling around my legs, my arms, my neck. They squeezed tight, pulling me down, forcing me into the ground, and I could feel the coldness seep into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. I thrashed, I kicked, I screamed for help, but no one came. The shadows consumed me, and the girl's laughter, so cruel, so twisted, echoed in my mind. Then, a flash of light. It wasn't bright, not like the sun. No, it was a dull, sickly glow, like the light of a dying star. The girl stopped laughing, her face twisting in confusion as the light grew stronger, enveloping her, consuming her. For a moment, I thought I was saved. But then the light dimmed, and I saw it. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a human form. It was a creature, massive and writhing, its black eyes covering every inch of its body. Its form was ever-changing, shifting like smoke, but one thing remained constant: the eyes. Thousands upon thousands of them, blinking, staring. All focused on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was trapped in a nightmare that had no end, no escape. And the creature, whatever it was, reached out toward me. I don't know how long I stayed in that room. Time lost all meaning as the creature closed in, its presence swallowing everything. The girl's laughter faded into nothingness, replaced by the endless chorus of whispers that filled my mind. And then, as if the very air was suffocating me, I heard the voice again. Only this time, it wasn't the girl's voice. It was a whisper, soft, gentle, yet so full of malice. A voice that I would never be able to forget. "Welcome to the game." I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my head spinning as the creature loomed above me. It had no face, only endless, shifting black eyes that reflected my fear, my terror. It was consuming me, drawing me into its depths, pulling me into a place where nothing but darkness and shadows existed. The whispers grew louder, echoing through my skull, drowning out everything else. They weren't just in my ears, they were in my mind, tearing at the edges of my thoughts. "Welcome to the game," they repeated over and over, and I felt a sickening realization seep into my bones. This was it. There was no escape. No way out. I had played the game for too long, and now, there was no turning back. I had become a part of it, a piece of the darkness, a piece of the story that would never end. The creature's massive form loomed over me, its eyes boring into my very soul. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even blink. And then, it spoke. Its voice wasn't human. It wasn't even a voice, it was more like a thought. A shared consciousness that invaded my mind, filling every corner of my brain. "You are ours now," it said, its words like a cold wind sweeping through my thoughts. "You will play forever." My heart stopped. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, suffocating me, like chains wrapping around my chest. I had become part of something far beyond my understanding. Something ancient, something eternal. The creature's form began to change again, twisting and shifting as the shadows pulled tighter, folding in on themselves like a collapsing star. The black eyes multiplied, covering every inch of the room, every inch of my vision. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The darkness was too overwhelming, too all-consuming. But just as I thought I would be lost forever, a flicker of light appeared. At first, it was barely noticeable, like the glow of a dying candle. But then it grew brighter, more intense. It pulsed, a rhythmic beat in the silence of the dark room. The creature recoiled, its massive form writhing in agony as the light grew stronger. The darkness began to fade. The black eyes, those endless, terrible eyes, started to shrink away, dissolving into nothingness. The shadows retreated, slipping back into the cracks and corners of the room, and the creature itself screamed. A sound that shattered the very air around us. I could breathe again. I could think again. The light, now blinding, pure, washed over me, engulfing the creature, consuming it whole. The screams of the creature grew fainter, drowned out by the light. And as the light enveloped everything, I felt myself being pulled away, lifted from the ground, freed from the suffocating darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but pure white light. Then, I was standing outside, on the street in Hollow Creek. The sun was rising, casting a soft, golden light over the town. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. I blinked, disoriented. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had happened. The library was gone. The town was still, the streets empty, as if nothing had changed. And yet, I knew something had. I looked down at my hands, and for the first time since I had arrived in Hollow Creek, I saw them clearly. They were trembling, shaking uncontrollably. It was then that I noticed the small, familiar detail that sent a chill running through me. On the palm of my left hand, there was a single black eye. The same black eye. The same empty, endless void. And I knew that no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, I could never escape. The game wasn't over. The game had just begun. I wasn't free. I never would be.